Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Pipeline Brew, the podcast that meets at the intersection of people and pipeline. We're bringing you fun yet insightful conversations where you'll not only hear from marketing experts, but also get to know them as well. Hey everyone, today I am super excited to be joined by Stephen Pritt. Stephen has been with Thomson Reuters since 2017 and is currently the VP of Content Marketing, where he has consistently increased pipeline and content year over year. I'm sure there's a correlation there. I've had the pleasure of knowing Stephen for a number of years as our paths crossed during my own stint at TR. We were actually office mates, or not office mates, but our offices were right next to each other, so we had some good times. But all that to say, this makes this episode even more exciting for me. Today, we're going to focus on Stephen's approach to leadership and collaboration, where Thomson Reuters is focusing efforts amidst today's B2B marketing landscape, and the importance of a learner's mindset, especially with the widespread adoption of new tech like AI. Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Matt, thanks so much for having me. This is great, and it's good to see you again. So we've been a long way from sharing offices, but thanks for having me on today.
Well, likewise. And we were not only, our offices were next to each other, but we didn't live but probably 5-10 minutes from each other since I moved across the country.
Yeah, I think after some of those talks, after meetings, we realized we had so many connections in point in terms of people we knew or places we lived, those kind of things. So yeah, a lot of similarities.
Well, and hopefully when, your kids are out of the house, maybe you'll be the next to move to Colorado as well.
I can't say that I'm not jealous at all. So I've got friends who live there and also in Spokane. And when I see their Instagram posts, I just feel like unfollowing them actually. So out of pure jealousy. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, great to have you on the show. So Stephen, I think, we like to start off each episode with a little bit of an icebreaker to get the ball rolling. So what is your go-to beverage when you need a little pick-me-up?
Yeah, I've got two, Matt. So one is coffee. I mean, I'm definitely a coffee connoisseur, so I'm very particular about that. So a nice coffee, don't need much in it, just a little bit of milk. And this one's probably more shameful, but I do enjoy a Rockstar Recovery energy drink. It's an orange one. It tastes like Tang. I know I just dated myself, but that's another one that's in the afternoon is one that I do enjoy. I don't know if it's healthy. I don't want to know if it is or not, but I do enjoy those every once in a while.
That's awesome. There's going to be a spike in Google search around what is Tang?
What the heck is Tang? Right. Yes. Oh, he is old. So, right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, in the new TR office that you guys recently moved into, did they build a coffee shop? Because they had the Starbucks, right, at the old Carrollton location?
That's correct. No, unfortunately, they did not. So pluses and minuses. So we are in the new Star location where the Dallas Cowboys practice. If anybody's a fan of Netflix and the Dallas Cowboys cheerleader series, that's literally right behind us. So unfortunately, there's no coffee in the building, but there is coffee shops close by. So I may have door dashed a little bit too much coffee from that location. So yeah.
There are some good coffee shops nearby. Now, do you have a whole setup at home? Do you make your own coffee as well from time to time?
I do. Yeah, I do have pour overs. I recently bought a mocha pot, very popular in Europe, and really been enjoying that. So as the weather gets cooler, I get more bougie. So I look at different options. But gas station coffee does not work for me. So I'm a little bit of a picky bougie coffee drinker, I have to admit. So, but
Well, you're in safe company here. You'll be pleased to know I just bought my first manual grinder.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm moving up in the coffee world.
Yeah. It can be an expensive hobby for sure.
No doubt. Well, before we talk about what you're up to today, I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, your passions, and your background.
Yeah, well, thanks, Matt. As a kid, I moved around quite a bit. I think like every 4 years we moved to a different location. So that was part of growing up mostly in the South and then kind of moved to the Midwest. I kind of consider St. Louis home, but now I live in Texas, as you'd mentioned before. So I've had a lot of experience of that. I had the good fortune earlier in my career to travel quite a bit. So have really enjoyed seeing different parts of the world and working with some nonprofits. Let's see, in college, I was a pre-med major. Most people go, what? But that is true. I was a biology and chemistry major. So it has nothing to do with marketing. But out of college, one of my first jobs was working for a production company. We made television commercials and movies. So I did that. I had my own agency for a while, and then kind of moved into sales, but really found my home in marketing. So that's a short version of my career. I personally enjoy anything outside. So I'm an avid trail runner, love hiking, camping, you name it. I'm married. I've got two daughters, and we're about to be empty nesters. So a lot going on in the Pritt home. So
So let me get this straight. You're about to be empty nesters. Your favorite activities are hiking, anything outdoors, and you live in Texas. All right, I'm just going to put that out there for you guys.
yes, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's really pitiful, honestly. Even trying to get any kind of elevation is like walking upstairs. That's about the extent that I have. So
Now for me, it's walking up our street. I'm out of breath at the top of the street. So,
yeah.
all right. So, any sort of aha moments throughout your career journey leading up to your time at Thomson Reuters?
No, I don't think there's any kind of major ones. And I think back, Matt, on, things that, at different stages of my career or different places. I think there are a few things, that kind of stood out to me, in terms of either advice somebody's given me. I think when I think about like leading teams, I think it's just really always important to figure out like how does your team, no matter if it's just you and a couple other people or a whole organization or even a department, like how do you fit into that bigger picture of what the organization's doing? I just think that that's really critical. I had a mentor who taught me a lot about that. It's not even just staying relevant or for political reasons. It's just knowing exactly your role in the bigger picture. And I think that happens, on a macro and micro level as well to ensure that your team members, know how they fit in that picture, even to the role level. So I thought that was really good advice. Another one that I think is really important that I've used quite a bit, and I think it's beneficial even, in today's current climate with, content and B2B marketing is learning just to stay curious a little bit longer. I think people talk a lot about that, but just keep on being curious and digging into that and having space for that in your schedule. I think that gives you the ability to do that with individuals, with team members, with coworkers, or even things like technology. It's one thing to kind of understand it, but being curious a little, just a tad bit longer, I think that really opens up doors to understand people, other teams, points of view. I mean, you name it. So I think that advice I received is really helpful across the board. And then one for me personally is just, as we'll talk later, I'm sure, about team culture. It's a passion of mine, along with leadership. But I think just helping people realize that, they're more than just their role or their title and how do they fit into that big picture? Those are some big lessons that I've learned from people ahead of me or people that have had bigger roles than mine at that time. And so I've really taken those with me, throughout my career.
I love that. I mean, I know you and I have talked a lot about just in general, sort of living with purpose. And I think it's so often undervalued or overlooked at work. And your point around employee, you're tying what you're doing to the, you can call it the business goals or objectives, but it's really it's the purpose of the company. It's the almost the North Star. Why do we exist outside of making a profit? And when you really start to distill that down to the individual job level, people start to realize, oh, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I feel there's a purpose to my work other than just, the day-to-day monotonous approach that a lot of roles can have.
Yeah. And I think that's hard. I mean, I think that's the gravitational pull of corporate America, right? We get on these calls, we do QBRs, or we hear our CMO talking about EBITDA, or something like that. And then I always think, well, how does maybe a graphic designer translate something that a CMO is talking about, our stock value, all the way down to, how does he make an impact? And it's not necessarily that they have to say that their design equals, whatever shares of stock or whatever the conversation is. But how do they play that role? Because I think teams can kind of get lost in that shuffle. And so I think it's incumbent on us to translate that, not even for motivation, but just like what's the part that you play, no matter how big or small that part may be.
100%. Well, good. Well, you're at TR now. You've been there, what, almost 8, 9 years now.
Yeah.
So yeah. So you're VP of content. So what does that look like? Tell us a little bit more about your role and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so we recently, I'd say about 3 years ago, Matt, we're looking across the board. I think everybody knows there was a big move to centers of excellence, bringing expertise from more of a decentralized model into centralization. So we took several teams from creative, when that's more of like the in-house, creative teams. We took content leaders and content contributors, and in our world, that's relegated towards like written content, so white papers, blogs, webinars, articles, all those kinds of things. And then we combined that with an SEO team. We also combined that with an organic social media team, and then an arm of basically ops and excellence and metrics and data performance, and a small segment of that for our group, and really just brought it all together so that we could really have a fuller content, supply chain in terms of creating content, distributing that content, but more of that natural focus, meaning, natural search, natural, organic, type of activities. So that was really the goal of bringing all those teams together. And that's kind of how we got to where we are today, is really building that content center of excellence.
That's awesome. And how has that transition been from more the decentralized to the COE model? I think because oftentimes you hear the argument, well, if you don't have folks aligned to the specific businesses, you're losing that subject matter expertise. Has that been a challenge, or what were some other kind of challenges that you guys had to work through?
Yeah. So I think right now, as you know, in marketing, these pendulums swing right back and forth in different areas. Right now, I feel from my perspective, the pendulum is definitely swung back to maybe putting those roles back into the segments, or back into maybe a demand gen team, or even like a solutions or product marketing roles, because of the need for, I'm sure we'll talk about later, like more personalization, being closer to the business, really understanding the customers more. And it's really six of one, half of a dozen other, but I really see a shift moving back in that direction. And we have been shifting our TR back into that type of mindset now. So now we're going back to that direction.
Interesting. Well, cool. Well, no, thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to transition to talking about leadership and collaboration. It's one of the things that I always recognized and appreciated in you both, unique, but I think they go hand in hand. But I always
Hmm.
viewed you as a great leader. I saw the folks who worked for you felt like they were part of a team and had a shared mission. And a lot of that was because I think you created such a great environment that fostered that collaboration. So we often hear about disconnects between departments like sales and marketing.
Hmm.
I often see, as I'm out on the road talking to marketers so much, there's disconnects even within your own functions, right? And it's
Hmm.
kind of like what they say with a household. If the parents aren't aligned, then how do you expect the kids to get in line? And so, have you experienced those types of challenges as you've led teams over the years? And if so, how do you approach that? And what advice do you have for others who maybe trying to solve that sort of inner department alignment challenges or opportunities?
Yeah, Matt, I think your observation's spot on. I think that we're seeing more of that. Usually you would say like, hey, there's tension between sales and marketing, those kinds of things, which are natural, right? But even more in house. I think that's really par for the course, Matt, in my opinion, with around disruption, because I think now people are trying to make sure that they're bringing the value, but with disruption, there's a lack of clarity. And so people really trying to understand that. And so that sometimes translates into, maybe tension even amongst team members, and I think it's important to kind of recognize a few things. I think for leaders, it's really important to understand what tension should be solved, and then what tension should be managed. So for example, sales and marketing, there's always going to be a tension there. So that's one to manage. It's not one you're ever going to solve. And you should be okay with that. And those are healthy tensions. There are some that might be more interdepartmental that I would say that are some that you should solve for, and I think as leaders in content creation or demand generation or wherever you sit in marketing, that's probably one of the biggest things that you can do is to bring that clarity, and to really understand where that tension is coming from, and I think there's also something that I kind of look at is, I always look at friction in a different way. I think sometimes people think friction is negative, but maybe this is from my biology background, but friction really is essential for movement, you know? So, if I'm moving my arm around, I may not feel that friction, but there is friction there, but that's equaling movement. And so I think when teams, whether to your point, whether it's departmentally or inside of teams, they think of that as a negative. I mean, obviously it can turn into a negative, but I think if you reframe that with the team to say, if you're not experiencing friction, you're probably not moving, And so
Yeah.
how do you use that as a growth lever with your teams to say, this means we are onto something? Again, going back to again, just my perspective, is it something I need to manage or is it something I need to solve?
I love that. It's such a pragmatic approach. I've not really heard it described that way, whether you should manage it or solve it. And it makes a ton of sense. And then similarly on the idea of friction, I've often found that the best leaders I work for and as part of leadership teams,
Hmm.
there should be a healthy amount of friction because it means we're challenging each other. And the value of leadership teams, the value of teams in general, in a lot of cases, is that diversity, the diversity of opinion and experiences and so on and so forth. And what that means is you're going to have natural friction. But if you don't, then to your point, that probably means there's only a singular voice, or you're just not really taking advantage of the full weight and impact that the team could have it through their various experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, there's a difference between sameness and oneness. And I always joke with my team, it's like, hey, if we have a bunch of Stevens running around, we're in a world of hurt because we don't want that, So you want different opinions, It's like, good Lord, you do not want that. So, what is that getting that sameness and being one is two different things. And so to your point, that you need that diversity, especially in today's landscape. I've seen examples where I tell all my new hires that come in, I'm like, there is no time period where you need to prove yourself before you bring input or observations or changes into the organization. I had one person came into our SEO team and
Yeah.
she was like, "Hey, have you thought about this?" I'm like, "We haven't. Let's do it. You don't whether you're 2 hours into the job or you've been here for 20 years, like we need that input. So I think that's really important.
That's awesome. Well, talk to me about your leadership style. What makes it different? How do you think about leadership?
Yeah, I think my approach and thinking about leadership is probably more around it's more of a stewardship issue. What I mean by that is it's more around, we have these individuals that are gifted, they're talented, they all bring something to the table. I assume that if I've hired them that they're leaning forward, they want to be here. If they're not, that's a different conversation. But, most of the time, I think leaders feel like they have to be the most intelligent person or the one that knows everything. And, kind of similarly, like I was just saying, like if every decision has to come to me, we're fundamentally broken. This is not working right. So I think most of the time, leaders are the ones who either lasted the longest or got there first, And so I think my view of leadership is really where can I bring clarity? Where can I remove obstacles for my team members? And then what are the only things that I can do to really make sure that I'm whatever authority or weight or whatever it's at the end of my title, no matter where I'm in my career, how can I leverage that for the benefit to remove those obstacles? And then along the way, if I can give away as much credit along the way, then I feel like I'm doing a successful job, basically. And I know that sounds a little Pollyannic and altruistic, but I think it really helps foster people to really do better work because I'm not the smartest person in the room. I don't have all the ideas, nor should, in my opinion, that be the case.
No, I love that. I had breakfast with a friend this morning who just retired from the Air Force, so knows nothing about the corporate world. And we were
Hmm.
talking about leadership, some leadership principles. And one of them was on this idea of stewardship or servant leadership, and how in a lot of ways it can be very counterintuitive or countercultural in a corporate environment where, you're trying to climb that ladder. And the best way to do that is to build yourself up. And if they always say, you've got to be your biggest advocate. And look, I think there's scenarios where you do need to be your own advocate, but at the same time, I think I'm of the same mindset.
Hmm.
Let your team shine. You're there. You hired people for a reason. They're there for a reason. You've got to trust them, and our job is to really foster that environment and steward them to kind of. It kind of sounds cliche, but be the best versions of themselves. And ultimately let that work together in harmony to be the best version of the team and what you guys are trying to collectively accomplish.
Yeah. I think I found that too, Matt, that and I couldn't agree with more with that. And again, it sounds almost like something on a Hallmark movie, but even, as leaders, when we have to make those hard decisions where we need to let people go, if you've approached it with that way before, then you really genuinely are trying to do what's best for them. If they're not a fit, there's no use to pretending that, kind of thing. I had an employee one time actually thank me afterwards for releasing him because the fact that it wasn't a good fit and it helped him to restart his going from a job to a career. But I think if we look at people not as, like you said, stepping stones or capital or that way. And I know we
Yeah,
generally don't as humans, but I think it gives a better holistic picture, even in those tough conversations that leaders have to make.
spot on. One of the things I hear a lot from employees, I've heard it throughout my career, is, as folks younger in their career, they say, "Man, I just don't know what our culture is. I don't feel like we have enough culture." What would you say to someone who doesn't feel like they have, they're not in a leadership position, they're not part of the culture committee or HR that
Mhm.
they feel like would traditionally set a culture? How would you encourage that person to, whether it's lean in or find their groove, or just how would you respond to somebody who says, "I'm just not feeling the culture"?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and we talk about this a lot. We've all been in roles where we love our role, but maybe not the environment, or we love the environment and not the role. And I think we can all say in our careers we can't always get that dialed in exactly right. I would say to that individual, Matt, one of the big things is start with your ways of working, and really make sure that you've got a way that's working, even if it's not contrary to what the company or the organization standards are, but I'm talking about in how you interact with people and how you deal with them. I think that's really the starting point. I have found that when individuals do that, people naturally gravitate towards that and they begin to create little subcultures. I think it's, taking whatever amount of influence you have, if it's a teaspoon or a truckload, and just working on that. And I think people tend to start to see that. Now, that may not eventually equate to dramatically changing your team or your department's culture or whatever, but you can control that. And at the same time, if that doesn't work over time, it just may not be the right culture fit for you. And I think recognizing that is okay, and trying to get that coefficient between your role and the culture, I think is not necessarily just equating to happiness or satisfaction on the job, but it's helping you have that environment where you can be the best version of yourself, bring those skill sets you've given to the organization and to see them maximized more than just, tolerated or pushing through on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, I love it. I want to transition now to just the world of content marketing.
Yeah.
So, I, in your role, especially when you walked through the structure of your team, you've got a great team. You've got a great set of resources. Even having folks dedicated around the performances is awesome. Obviously, though, there's been massive disruption in the world of content marketing. What are your thoughts
Mhm.
on the current state of B2B content marketing? No
Yeah.
small question.
I was gonna say, yeah, thanks for giving me a softball one there. So,
We just lob it up to you. Yeah, no problem.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'll swing and miss on this one. No, Matt, I kind of go back and forth on this. I would say that the understatement is that we're kind of really in an unprecedented time. Not even just because of AI, and I don't want to over-index on that, but it's unprecedented in my opinion because it's changing so fast. It's undefined, but at the same time, it's exciting, because I think everybody's in it. I mean, I think if you talk to anybody or something you read on LinkedIn, nobody has this thing dialed in right now because of how much disruption is there. I think it's just really, our mentality on how we take that change. I kind of wrote down just a couple of things in terms of things that I think, especially for B2B marketing as it relates to content. Obviously AI's impact on how content's being created, the tools that they have, and then also that natural, we were just talking about tension with the desire for more content. And then, of course, we think about things like search and those kind of things. I think that's just, a whole topic in itself. I think about personalization at scale and having more authentic content, not even just, personalized content. I think sometimes we think about personalization, we think about ABM, we think about, persona driven, we talk about customer journey, we talk about the sales cycle and the sales journey. But I think a demand for more authentic content is going to be really, really important. And then I've seen a swing in brand and branding coming back. When I say coming back, that it's moving back up the scale in terms of prominence because it's now required to bring that human element and trust. When we think about content, even in the entertainment industry, artists are now signing affidavits to ensure that it was something that they had original thought on, So that need for authenticity is still there. So brands' ability to portray that and to communicate that human side and creating that brand as a trust, that to me is kind of shimmying up the ladder of of prominence. We're seeing a lot around interactive content and video, still kind of coming up more and more. I think we're going to see a huge shift into custom content. And what I mean by that is AI's ability to, like, imagine a world where I put in some information and I get a custom white paper that's geared towards me, not not just one that's personalized to my job title or where I am in that buying group. I think there's a lot of opportunities around that. I think other trends similarly to the brand idea in that same hemisphere, Matt, is around just own channels. I mentioned SEO, but organic social media, we're seeing in sometimes a driver to that's actually outperforming paid. We're seeing that on both natural search and also in organic traffic through social channels. And so the idea of communities, what I would consider form based marketing, where we think about Quorum and Reddit and Medium and all those, like those are gaming dominance where it used to be more of just, places where people would go to chat. We have started out really focusing on those and understanding what those are communities are saying and how does that impact even what kind of content we create. And I think the last one is just, again, nothing new, but content to drive pipeline. How do we enable, our sales team for new rapid content, real world timely objections that are happening faster than we can create a white paper to get put in their hands? And so how are teams looking at that? So those are things I'm seeing, but also problems that I think can be solved. But again, I'd say it's unprecedented and undefined right now.
Oh, that's great. One follow-up question. You talked about authentic content. Unpack that for me a little bit. What do you really mean by authentic content?
Yeah, I would say, Matt, it's really around content that is really providing a service, that again, it's more than it is just good content or quality content. I think those are components of that, but is it coming out of an attitude of really serving up information? And I'm not saying it has to be unbiased. I mean, obviously, every company is going to have their own content that has their slant on it, but is it really servicing the need of what the customers are asking versus putting it out there? So I guess maybe a way to define that, Matt, would be here's a white paper, the quintessential, piece of content.
Yep.
And does it need to be gated? Does it not to be need to be gated? Are you putting it out there for real consumption, or are you just trying to get a form fill? Now, there's nothing wrong with either one, but I think making sure that there's room for content for people to consume that generally is answering their questions and in a more authentic way, in that more trusted way versus it being with a hook or a barb. I think that's becoming more valued. Similarly to how things like on Quorum or Reddit are going, I think there's a need for that. And so there's both that, again, it's not an or, it's an and. But I think that style of content, I think will be rewarded more, both in terms of how it's consumed, but also the demand for that. Because, you know, with technology right now, I could put out 2 white papers, in an hour today if I wanted to. Now, they might suck, but it's possible, but it's not authentic.
Yeah, no, that's great. We did market research recently, and one of the questions was around the current state of B2B marketing. And there was an interesting statistic, which was something like 70% of B2B buyers are frustrated with the current state of B2B content. And
Mhm.
what that made me realize is 2 things. One, it's good news because what it shows is buyers still are hungry for content. That's still how
Mhm.
they learn, how they educate themselves. They need to be educated. At the end of the day, they're making significant buying decisions for their organizations that could make or break not only their career, but the company's, profitable growth, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
But then number two, I think it really does lean into what you're describing around the authenticity. Your content it has to have value. You can't just put content out for content's sake. You've really got to understand the why. And somebody described effective content as it really is it's an enabler. If you think
Hmm.
about it as an enabler for the buyers, there's clear purpose in why you're putting this out, not just to get a form fill, which again, something wrong with that,
Right.
but there has to be that sort of specific objective. Why are we really trying to do this with the intent of et cetera, et cetera. So I
Right.
love your perspective on that.
Yeah. I also wonder too, Matt, if part of content marketing is going to shift to help customers even to navigate all of the content that's out there. I think part of that is how do content marketers help become that beacon and separate from all the noise because the volume is going to be so high. I think that's similar to the stat you said. Like that might be a new tool set that content marketers, especially in the B2B space, have to learn. But then how do you achieve that as well? So.
100%. Well, question for you on, it's related. So we recently hired a director of content marketing, and we
Hmm.
were fortunate to land a phenomenal candidate, and she's hit the ground running. But we had used the word unprecedented. We had an unprecedented response to this role. We had thousands of applicants, and a lot of roles you do, but the person, their last job was working at a used car sales lot, and you're like, I
Hmm.
don't see how that translates to content. But we had so many good content marketers apply, and we could only hire one. What advice would you have sitting in your seat for content marketers who, maybe have been riffed or are looking for their next opportunity? How do they really stand out amidst we talk about noise in the just content world.
Right.
There's a lot of noise, and it's not bad noise, but there's just a lot of folks out there who are trying to land their next content role.
Yeah. No, it's a good question, and I think organizations are moving towards more of a reliance on AI. So these roles, I think, are more precious or more valued, and I think people are obviously generally concerned about their roles if they're in the content space. I would say demonstrating your value of how you can look more full funnel around content, I think would be a huge one. I mean, some content marketers, specifically look at maybe different parts of the funnel, but I'm talking pre-sale, during the sale, after the sale, really a full look at that. And then I think obviously, the big one, and it's no big major news release here, but demonstrating the ability to use AI in a thoughtful way. I think there's a huge difference between just yes, I can use X, Y, and Z tool versus how do I use that in a thoughtful way. I think businesses, and I'm seeing it in my organization, other organizations, they want to use AI. They just don't know how to use it in the right way or in a more meaningful way. And I think the content marketers who can demonstrate that or show that propensity, I think will definitely have a leg up. So it's beyond just do you know how to use ChatGPT or Jasper or Writer or whatever tool du jour there is out there. I think showing that how that's going to make an impact and where that focus shifts, I think businesses are starving for that more than just the application of a tool.
Well, to me, that's great advice because as I looked at, dozens, if not hundreds of our candidates that came through, there was an easy way to filter out some there was no demonstrated performance. It was,
Mhm.
I generated 52 blogs and 4 white papers, and I managed a research project. And I'm like, cool. Did that add any value? And I think even breaking it down like you were pre-sale, during post-sale, et cetera, and just really
Mhm.
understanding, it goes back to the earlier part of our discussion, really understanding where you fit in to helping a business solve their core challenges or opportunities. So I think that's really smart. The AI piece, actually, I don't think that goes without say because to me, I think AI, when it comes to content, there's still a little bit of a stigma around it. And what I mean by that is, I hired a freelance content person a few months ago as we were trying to onboard a
Mhm.
full-time person. And I said, I'm not looking for somebody who can throw a concept in ChatGPT and send me, I can do that myself. And so I think there's this stigma of, oh, well, I don't want them to think I use AI because maybe they think I'm shortcutting my job or that my content's not going to be authentic or it's going to sound like a machine. And so I think your point on that is, look, you shouldn't be afraid. Not only should you not be afraid to talk about it, but you should embrace it and you should understand how to articulate that in a value added way. Because to me, you can now do the work of 10 people, if you know how to use AI correctly, or you can accelerate things. Heck, you can make it better. I mean, if you have I love my AI. I have great conversations with him or her, I don't know,
Right.
around, but you could just work through this brainstorming. And I think it can really unlock so much if you know how to use it. So I think that's actually great perspective, because my experience in this last round of interviews was, I think some people are still pretty reluctant to say, yeah, I know how to use it.
hmm I totally agree. It's a value add. It's not like something you need to hide on your resume. I think, like you said, knowing how to use it, showing how you can use it. And I think content's going to be required more, like you said, around measurements, like maybe beyond just the pipeline ones, but how do you get into sentiment and what competitors are doing and recall metrics and those kind of things. If AI can help with some of those things, but you've got to be able to then shift your focus beyond just the creation aspect of it into the performance aspect. And that's widening even more as well too.
Awesome. Well, that was great discussion. And, one of the things I love doing with my guests on the show is talking more about not just about their work. I like to get to know them and let the audience get to know them too. And I'm
hmm
fortunate to have, gotten to know you during our time at TR and beyond, but let's open it up. So this segment's called What's on Tap. So what's on
Yep.
tap for Stephen Pritt? So at the top of the show, we talked about your favorite pick-me-up beverage, which is a modern version of Tang and some really high quality coffee. By the way,
Yep.
what is your preferred coffee shop over in the Star area?
Well, the closest one is Ascension, so that's one I've been going to as well. But
Yeah.
there's a Summer Moon that just opened up down the street, so sometimes I'll hit that up a little bit. So I'm always on the lookout for another one. We opened up another one by our house called Lucky Goat. It's out of Florida,
Oh,
so yeah, so I'm trying a whole bunch of different ones. So
man, Summer Moon brings back some good memories. I was a sucker for their lattes until I made the mistake, Stephen, of looking at the calorie information on a full moon or whatever. I guess it's called a summer moon. And I'm like,
right,
oh my gosh, it's like 800 calories and
yeah,
made me
I know what they
sad.
put in it. Yeah, it's amazing stuff, but yeah, probably not great for you. So
7 milks, that's all I know. It was delicious, but well,
yeah.
awesome. Well, I'll flip that question around. So end of day, what's your go-to beverage just to kind of to unwind?
Yeah, this is going to sound boring, but it's coffee again. I mean, I am generally one of those people that I can have a cappuccino after dinner and not worry about sleeping in the evening. So, in an odd way, Matt, it's very calming. So I don't mind another coffee at the end of the day. So
And you're not talking decaf, you're talking a regular cappuccino.
yeah, full throttle, all calf. Yeah. So yeah, yeah.
Stephen, that is impressive.
Well, I don't know if it is. We'll see. But yeah, it is oddly enough one that I truly enjoy. So
Well, I love that. Well, I know how much you value your time in the outdoors and in the wilderness. What sort of activities do you enjoy doing in the Texas summer, the heat of the Texas summers? How do you actually get to take advantage of that passion of yours?
yeah, it's early in the morning or late at night. One new one, Matt, that I've been trying out. It takes a little bit of travel, but not much. Is I've just recently tried fly fishing. So as you mentioned, I'd been at Thomson Reuters for a
Oh,
while. We get a catalog, we can choose something, and I've always wanted to try fly fishing. So I got a rod and reel and I've tried it, took a lesson and just fell in love with it. Just the idea of being outside. I don't even care if I catch anything. It's just being in a river, it's just been really fun. So I've done that maybe two or three times this summer already and just absolutely love it. So I thought it was one of those old man things, and maybe it is. So don't tell me otherwise. But I've really really enjoyed it. So that's been kind of a fun new little hobby to add to the outdoor repertoire.
that's so cool. Well, you know where they have great fly fishing? I'm just going to put that out there for you again.
I see a central theme here. So yes, I definitely see that.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, I also know that you're a big movie buff.
Yep.
So, do you enjoy cinematography? Is it the writing? Is it the action? I know your first job out of school too was being in that industry, but yeah, what do you love about movies?
Yeah, I think, Matt, the main thing is the process. Like, I love understanding the process and seeing that come to life. And I love how stories are written. So beyond just storytelling, which I know everybody says, but how these stories are written and how you can tell a similar story in many different ways. I think the best movies, are the ones that tie it in real nicely at the end that has some meaning towards it. Like, I don't know, this is a weird example. I'm not a big superhero fan, but I watched the new Superman movie the other day and I rented it, and like there was a human
It's pretty
aspect to that. And
awesome.
they took a really different version of that, and it's like same story, we all know it, but told in a different way. And I actually went
Yeah.
into it thinking I wasn't going to like it, but I'm like, well, I got to see it, right? Everybody's talking about it. And I think, that's a great example. So, of a great storytelling, but in a different way. And I don't want to spoil that movie, but at the end, there's a really good exchange between Superman and Lex about humanity. And I was like, who would have thought that you could have taken that twist to it and still made a good movie
Yep.
and brought some meaning to it? That's something that I more respect than necessarily do I like people in, tights and capes, basically. So anyway, I thought it was a really, fun movie, but also had some meaning. Like that kind of thing is the idea of how I love and appreciate movies. So
That's awesome. Well, not to put you on the spot, but do you have a favorite or top three favorite movies?
my number one favorite movie is Back to the Future. That's one of the ones that I feel like is tethered to my childhood. So that's if when people ask me the question, for some reason, that's the one that always comes to mind. I mean, there's so many to like, but that is one that if it's on, I'll watch it no matter what. So
That's awesome. Well, I know, you've got two girls, I've got two boys, but probably no different. It's been fun as my kids have gotten to the age, throughout their life where you can go back and watch some of these classics. And sometimes they roll their eyes and they're like, this was cool, but
right.
like they loved the Back to the Future movies.
Yep.
And there's others where they're just timeless. And yeah, it makes me appreciate, because I think I may have told this before on this podcast, but I remember when we watched Birds, it was the Alfred Hitchcock movie for the first
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
And he's like, this movie's so scary. And I'm like, I watched and I'm laughing as the birds are crashing into the window. He was so mad at me. He's like, you're ruining my childhood. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. No offense, because Hitchcock was brilliant, movie writer. But
Right.
anyways,
Yeah, I felt that same way with when I was like, okay, girls, we're gonna watch Goonies. This is a forced family event, but tread lightly because I don't know if I could handle if they didn't like it. And I was like, so the good news is they love the
oh,
movie, but
it's
I'm like, you can't trample on this one. I'm sorry, we're just gonna have to not. So
no.
that ended up well, but there's been other ones that are like, this is lame. So
You're like, all right, we're opening the circle of trust here. I'm
but
going to letting you in, but there's an expectation.
right, yes, exactly. So
That's awesome. Well, Stephen, this has been an amazing conversation. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time today to join and just share all your great thoughts. So I really appreciate it.
yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Matt. It's a great podcast, and really enjoy seeing you and connecting again. And again, really appreciate the time today.
Likewise, see you in Colorado, hopefully in a couple of years.
Sounds like I need to get a ticket for that pretty soon. So yes.
All right, well, take care.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Thanks again to Stephen for joining us on today's episode of The Pipeline Brew. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Please leave me a comment with your thoughts and make sure you subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. Once again, I'm Matt Hummel, and I'll see you next time.